Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on financial management during COVID-19. My name is Dave Newick. I'm the Managing Director here of Arken.legal, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Jackie Wilding, who is the director or one of the directors at Bryden Johnson, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Good afternoon to you, Jackie.
Good afternoon, David. And good afternoon, everyone else.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have been absolutely frantically busy, and we're going to talk about that in a little while, but really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to me and to the participants in the webinar today.
Thank you, David.
Now, we're also joined by Jessica Furbank. You won't hear from her, but she is in the background as always running the webinar, so thank you, Jess, in advance. Now, a couple of things just to bear in mind when we start thinking about the housekeeping of running this webinar. For those of you that have been in an Arken.legal webinar before, you'll see that up in the top right-hand corner, you've got a little control panel, and down at the bottom of that control panel, you've got an opportunity to ask questions. So please feel free to do so. Jackie has welcomed the opportunity to do that. So we're very keen to be able to make this as interactive as we can. And basically what we'll do is we'll be running a interview style webinar where I'm going to be asking Jackie some questions and chipping in with my own experience as well. So then we'll get through those list of questions. And at the end of that time, we'll do the summary and wind up with answering some of your questions as well. So we can have the next slide, please, Jess. So, Jackie, can you just tell us a little bit about Bryden Johnson and yourself and how long you've been an accountant?
Well, so Bryden Johnson's been around for over 120 years. We're obviously a firm of chartered accountants. We're in Croydon, and we've been there over 40 years now. And I myself have been at Bryden Johnson 40 years this year, and obviously very keen to have my 40-year celebration when we're all let out again. And we act for owner-managed businesses. So when you asked me to talk for this webinar, I mean, it's just right up my street, because that's what I've spent the last 40 years working with. Anything from start-up, from one-man bands up to 250 employees. So I'm very happy to be helping everyone today.
Fantastic. Well, look, we really appreciate it. Just to clear a couple of things up, your firm is 120 years old. I think actually your firm is nearly as old as New Zealand is old as a country, so that throws some context in it. And just also to clarify your surname, it is Wilding and not Wildling. It's in Game of Thrones.
Yes, right? I am a Wilding, although I love the Game of Thrones, having watched it 3 times.
All right, so you're not inclined to run around with furs and a spear, just to be clear.
No, don't have that image, anybody.
Brilliant. All right, well, look, we've got lots of different people from lots of different sized firms in the webinar today, and we're going to really try and cover a wide range of ground. And obviously this is really all about best practice financial management during this challenging time that we're in. But just before we get into the questions and some of the content of the webinar, I just wanted to set the tone a little, perhaps, in terms of what we need to think about as we start heading into not just this webinar, but obviously these challenging times that we're in. And over the last few webinars that we've run, and we've run quite a few over the last week to 10 days to really try and do our bit to help the industry through this really difficult time. At different times in those webinars, I've talked about the mindset for participants like yourselves and for people in our industry, and pulled from some of my own experience in terms of working through different economic cycles and different companies, particularly those that are in distress, and have found that in those sorts of times that really the approach that I take mentally to some of these really sizable challenges is really, really important. And so I have a saying, and I don't know whether it's of any use to you whatsoever, but I have this saying that I say to myself, which is that I can't change the world, but I can change my world. And I focus on that, particularly during difficult times. And if we think about that in this particular circumstance, and if we think about this from a financial management standpoint, we've got all of these macroeconomic things happening, and we can't do a lot about them because we are in lockdown. And some of these things will start to have an impact on us, and we need to start thinking about what we can do and the positive steps that we can take to perhaps not just survive, but thrive as well. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that in this webinar. So hopefully that kind of helps to set the tone. During the course of this webinar, we're going to be talking about a lot of cash flow management. We're covering that. We're covering some government assistance. We're talking about communicating with your staff. We're certainly talking about some of the challenges, obviously, that you're no doubt confronting at the moment. And we're going to be trying to make that as personal as possible for estate planning practitioners. And then we're going to start talking about perhaps some of the opportunities and some of the things all the way through, which are pulling from Jackie's experience with different clients that she's seen go through different things, and give you some of the tools and tips and techniques which hopefully are going to be of use to you as you start to go through this challenging time that we're in. So let's get into the webinar. So Jackie, every business is different, but currently we're all bound together by confronting COVID-19. What do you think the main challenges businesses are currently confronting or are going to confront during this lockdown phase?
Well, David, I can talk from experience as well as all my clients' experiences. So the biggest challenges obviously have been adapting to working from home, adapting to the use of IT, and we did notice that a lot of our clients weren't quite ready to deal with this. And although luckily we'd already converted to the cloud, so we only had to do a couple of tweaks. And also having to manage the team remotely. I think that's been our biggest challenge, and the challenge for my clients is actually trying to manage the team and get our managers to upskill themselves in management skills, which is a lot different from being face to face. And then the final one is just being honest with ourselves and honest with our clients. And we've been doing a lot of hand holding over the last 3 weeks, probably longer actually, because this really started in February. Helping coaching people through actually making some really hard commercial decisions, because we've got to be making the right decisions for the best interest of our business, our clients and our staff. And we mustn't forget that we on this webinar, we're all SME business owners, and we are the lifeblood of our UK economy. There's 6 million of us in the UK, and we will come out of this, and some of us will hopefully come out stronger.
Wow, 6 million. I wasn't actually aware of that number. That is a huge number of small businesses, isn't it? 6 million. Yeah. Wow. Look, I think probably one of the things that I'd say about that too is that particularly within the estate planning industry, there's also a real challenge around business process, because many businesses have got very used to running a business process which they've run in the same way for many years, and that typically revolves around a face-to-face contact. And now all of a sudden, obviously, that's very difficult, and there's legal requirements around things like execution of wills, but there's also just the simple business process in terms of how do you engage with your client. And so there's been quite a bit of a challenge for practitioners to adjust. And the larger the firm, the bigger the adjustment, of course, that you've got to try and roll out.
Yeah, I mean, I act for quite a big legal firm. We've got 140 employees. So trying to manage a legal practice that is doing wills, probate, conveyancing obviously has stopped, but they're doing an awful lot of wills and estate planning at the moment, and trying to manage 140 staff remotely, it has been a real challenge for them. And I mean, and luckily, most of my clients' IT has stood up to the challenge. But as you probably read, I think there's a 12-week delay on ordering laptops?
Yes.
Because obviously they're manufactured a long way away. So yeah, people can't actually get laptops now. So yeah, it's been a real challenge, David.
So if you think about any business, the high level success factors, and I do mean high level, are typically cash flow, profitability and growth. What do you think companies should really focus on during this lockdown phase?
I think, like all of my clients, including myself, it's got to be cash flow management. I mean, that's got to be on the top of your agenda. Really weekly rolling forecasts, monthly rolling forecasts, because you've got to work out when you need to ask for help. Now, we're going to talk later about the government funding and support from just traditional banking and overdraft facilities, but there's no point, as you know, even before COVID-19, the worst thing you can do is ask too late. If you need the money next week or next month, they're just not going to be able to react quick enough. The bank managers are under so much pressure at the moment. There's been 130,000 CBIL loan applications, and it's growing every day, that they just can't cope with the volume. So I'm encouraging all my clients to just monitor their cash flow and project as far forward as they can, the next 6 months ideally, to work out when they're going to get their pinch point. Some of my clients have already reached that pinch point, and they need to be asking for help sooner rather than later, because this is going to carry on for the next 6 months, and then business won't go back to normal, I don't think, for the next 12 months.
Right, so key takeaway there is plan now your cash flow for the next 6 months.
Definitely, because you've got to ask early, because otherwise you're not going to get a speed of response that you really need from the banks.
Yeah, 150,000 is a huge number, isn't it? That's a massive number of applications to process. But you have had some success stories, haven't you? When we were talking earlier, you were speaking about a client who had just received a CBIL loan. Yeah,
so I'm really pleased. That's my first client who's got it through. That was with NatWest, and they got their £250,000, which is obviously interest and capital free for a year, and a very good interest rate, 4.8%. So I would encourage people that we want to stay with the high street banks, obviously, because that's where you're going to get the most competitive rate. So it is working, and we'll talk later about the information you actually have to supply. There's quite a lot of information you have to supply.
Of course, yes, and the time it takes to do that. If I can just take a little segue into the tech world for a moment. In the tech world, and typically you've got these businesses, like Uber, but perhaps not of that size, startup businesses, and they really focus on growth instead of profitability. And so what they do is they go and get funding from VC firms, and typically around this time of year they might get, 200,000, £1 million, whatever it might be. And that then gives them a runway, and the way they measure that is through a cash burn analysis tool, which I use myself in our business. So I know at any one time what length of time we've got before essentially available cash runs out, based on sales costs and everything else. Now, for businesses that are highly profitable and will remain highly profitable, that's not such a consideration. But I wonder, for businesses that perhaps have been impacted, that this is perhaps something that they should consider. What do you think?
Well, just to explain to everyone what cash burn is, when you say cash burn, that means that we're actually getting negative cash flow. So obviously our outgoings are more than our income, and for some of my clients, income is now absolutely zero. So we act for a couple of event arranging companies, and obviously their income has fallen off a cliff. I also act for some children's nurseries. Obviously, when they closed the nursery schools that Friday, their income fell off a cliff. So looking at your cash burn is looking at how much cash is coming out of the business on a weekly, monthly basis, and how long is it going to be before you actually run out of cash, or you've exhausted your bank overdraft facility. And again, that goes back to the importance of planning more frequently than, not doing it a year. For a year, actually do it weekly, because you don't know, now you're going to run out of cash much quicker. Yes,
of course. Yeah, so critical to get a handle on that, absolutely. So if cash flow is the number one thing, what are some of the actions that companies can and should take to manage cash flow successfully?
Well, we've been talking to all our clients about at least the key 8 things that they can do. So the first one is to get really tight control over your trade debtors. And I would encourage everyone, I know this may seem obvious, but sometimes we're so busy emailing that we forget to pick up the phone and talk to our clients. So talk to every client, find out what their financial position is. Don't be scared to ask for, get them to do a payment plan with you, because it's very easy for clients now to be a bit scared, very cautious, and then just suddenly stop paying. So it's better to talk to them and get a payment plan in place, which we've done with our clients, and I know my other clients have done the same. So it's better to get something than get nothing. Obviously, negotiate with landlords. I know the government has made it really clear that landlords need to be receptive, and I've seen my clients who've had 3 months rent, only suspended, obviously, but suspended. We're talking to suppliers and renegotiating supplier terms. We can also agree to have payment plans with HMRC. So one of my clients today actually rang HMRC, and I told him what to say, coached him through the process, and he was really excited to tell me about an hour ago that he's been let off the next 3 months, and then we'll get a payment plan in place, which hopefully we'll get 6 to 12 months payment plan to repay that. My clients have also got capital payment holidays on bank loans. Some of my clients have been lucky enough to get rates relief, and one of the other strategies that some of my other clients have been doing is rotating staff so that everyone gets an opportunity to actually work. So they're doing a 2-week on, 2-week off rota. That's one of my bakery clients, so that at least the staff work for 2 weeks and get paid, and then the next staff come in and then they work. And then one of my other clients is just looking at reducing hours and putting people on a 4-day week. And obviously, if it became more critical, he'd put it on a 3-day week. But it's complete buy-in, obviously at owner level down, down to the staff. So everyone is taking a pay cut and everyone is going down on a 4-day week. So there's been a lot of strategies being talked about, and I think most people are ticking off most of those as they go along.
And that's both for this lockdown phase, but also in preparation for what they expect is going to be coming in the next few months, I take it.
Absolutely, because we don't know, do we, when this is all going to stop. And as I said, with my event company, they've already started to talk to some of their clients who think they might be able to have some smaller events in September, October, but rather than 20,000 people, they might only be able to do 20 events, or they might be doing visual events over in Europe for 20,000 people, but obviously their income has fallen off a cliff. They've lost 6 million of turnover. That's just completely disappeared. So for some businesses, they don't know when their next amount of income is going to come through. So that's why you've got to be looking forward, and the banks are encouraging everybody to look forward at least for the next 18 months, but just being realistic on their expectations.
Of course. If we start thinking about costs, now there's a lot of talk about companies who are lowering costs to match current or likely revenue streams. What's your advice of how and when to approach this?
Well, to discuss a tool that I think will be a good one for your audience to look at is that we've put an awful lot of our clients now on Xero, which is a cloud-based accounting package, which is pretty good, and obviously we use it and David uses it. But if you actually look at Futrli, which is spelled Futrli, it's an excellent cash flow projecting tool, and it also allows you to scenario plan. So I suppose from a good point of view, the banks are actually encouraging clients who are asking for bank loans to actually look at worst case scenario, say no income or 25% of revenue or 50% of revenue, and maybe do another 75% of revenue, and scenario plan for each of those eventualities to work out where your pinch point is. And it's really important to have a visual tool like that to see where the danger spots are, and also if you've got a cyclical business, which months are going to be your pinch points. But I would also encourage everyone to look at all their overheads, cut out any unnecessary spend. I know my clients are reviewing their phone contracts, their IT contracts, their cleaning contracts. They're looking at staff structure and how the work's being allocated across the business. Can it be more streamlined and carried out more effectively? I mean, I'm sure everyone is seeing that they've cut their staff, but actually other staff have upped their game and are actually doing a lot more work than we thought they could do. And also with the furloughing, which we'll talk about a bit more later, you know, just be careful, obviously, who you do furlough. That's quite a decision in its own right. So you've got to be really careful who you are furloughing, and then just be realistic when you do your cash flow projections about the job retention grant. Again, we'll talk about that later, but in my personal opinion, we won't see any cash coming through to our clients till middle of May. And I think some businesses were under the impression they might get money in April. And I think that is not going to happen. So I think we all need to be realistic that that money won't come through till May.
So that means that they're covering April cash payroll, essentially.
Exactly.
Look, I'll just share a little anecdote. I ran a business. I've started this business from a garden shed out the back of a small town in New Zealand, and upon arriving back from the UK when I was over here, and I grew and grew this thing, and it got pretty large, and we lost our largest client. And right then we entered into a sort of a mini recession. It was kind of around early 2000, and I'd established this brilliant team. There was about sort of 18 staff, and they were fantastic. And I really didn't want to go down the typical route of just sort of slashing staff numbers, although I did have to let a couple go. But instead, what I did was I looked at my expense line, and I found that over the sort of 7 or 8 years that I'd been in business, that the expense line of the business had got a bit bloated. And in fact, what I did was I found 60% savings in my expense line. And that was pretty significant for a business of its size, because none of those things actually made the blindest bit of difference to the business being able to carry out its core functions. And so my advice to you would be that if you run a business that's been around for a while, that you do consider all of your expenses, because you may well find that there's some critical things which deliver business efficiency and which you absolutely need, but there's other things that actually have just been there, and then you've kind of done something else and you've forgotten about that, and you're really focused on sales and out the front end, and you don't really pay the attention to the expense line that you need to. And sometimes there can be savings in there. And in fact, I went on, and that turned a business which was heading towards making a loss into a business that was then highly profitable. And I in fact sold that business and did very well from that. And I often think back to that time that the core decision that I made was to consider my expense line. So there might be something in that for you in your businesses, and to consider whether there's perhaps some cost efficiencies, but also some other efficiencies that you can find. Now, Jackie, if we just turn our attention to some of the various different government economic initiatives which are available, can you give us a bit of a run through of those? I know that a lot of the participants might be familiar with this, but it'd be really great to hear from you as to what people are doing and using and accessing and how they're doing that.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, I'm sure everyone's heard about the furlough job retention scheme, and obviously I was quite emotional when I heard the Chancellor announce that, because I really thought my clients were going to be in serious trouble. So as you know, that grant is available. The portal will be open on the 20th of April, so we're helping all our clients to get all their information on the portal when it becomes live. That allows you to pay staff on furlough 80% of their salary, and then you get back that 80% of their salary plus your 3% pension plus your 13.8% national insurance. And I am anticipating payments in May, as I said before. But that initiative is March, April and May, and I personally don't believe that is going to be extended. But at least that's given clients enough time and breathing space to get their finances in order to then think about the next stage, which is potentially getting a CBIL loan. So for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme. So that is 80% government funded. It gives you 1 year capital payment holiday and interest payment holiday, as I said before, at quite a good rate. But you do have to supply a lot of information. You can only go to your current bank because they haven't got the capacity to deal with any new clients. And you have to produce last 2 years accounts, 18 months to 2 years cash flow, and you can borrow 25% of your turnover as a maximum, or 2 times your salary. and up to 250,000, which is what my client got yesterday, there's no personal guarantee. So that, although there has been 130,000 applications and only 1,000 approved at the moment, so there's probably some businesses applying that shouldn't be, because if you were losing money before and you were in trouble, and you know, the bank is still using that criteria, which I suppose is fair to say they would, that you've got to be able to prove that you can service that debt when you get to the after the year's repayment holiday, because that 6-year loan has got to be repaid in 5 years. For the hospitality and retail and also children's nurseries, they added in, there's council tax grants. One of my clients got a windfall yesterday of, they didn't even apply for this, and the council put 25 grand in their bank account yesterday. So they were very happy. I mean, they are in the retail sector. So it just shows that you don't actually have to apply for it. As the councils did say, they know who you are, and if they know you're in that industry, they will give you the grant, and that was paid direct into their bank account. We know that we've got relief on VAT payments, so any payments due in March, April and May and June, we don't have to pay. Then obviously we'll have to get time to pay later on that. And then also the other good news for anyone who's self-employed or who rents a property, if you've all got July payments on account, tax to pay, obviously that's been postponed. But again, that will be due in January when you make your balancing payments. So, you know, obviously the grants are a one-off win, but for everything else, it's just deferring those liabilities, which is another reason why we've got to be really careful to build those extra costs that are going to come in later on, and later on into your cash flow forecasts.
And one of the things that you and I have discussed over the last little while is that whilst you can defer your VAT and your PAYE, you still owe the money, right? So you've still got to pay it back. And I know that there's probably some participants in the webinar today who are saying, well, wow, I don't want to be on the hook to the HMRC for, the thousands of pounds. How do you get around kind of working with that? And what we have done here at Arken.legal is to say, well, actually what we're going to do is, and we've picked up on these things, these deferrals, is we take the money and we just put it into essentially a different bank account, and it's there in case we need it. So it's really just to see out the next kind of little period of time before we get to the next phase in the economic cycle. And that way, if the HMRC or when the HMRC requires that back, then we haven't had to use it, then we can pay it back. But in the meantime, we've then got some cash which is there if things were to take a downturn. So that may be useful perhaps. Are you seeing other clients do that as well, Jackie?
Yes, and in fact I've done it myself as well, because we've got to pay it back. So I think the other point to make is, by having those deferral mechanisms in place, could have the danger of some of us maybe not making the right commercial decisions now because there's a false sense of security. So either you do what Dave is doing, which is what I'm doing, I'm just putting the money away and pretending it's not there. But if you do get to a situation where actually you have to use that money for something else, then you could be in the situation where you do need to then go for one of these CBIL loans, because you have got to pay the money back. But don't let that put you off furloughing your staff, just because you don't want to be paying staff with the money that you should have been paying to HMRC. So you may make a decision to furlough more staff than maybe you imagined. And I know one of my clients has furloughed 86% of their staff, and my events management company has had to furlough 90% of their staff, while they just re-strategize and decide what they're going to do for the long term. So that's really good advice, David.
Well, I think there's a whole lot of timing and phasing issues, which we're going to get into in a moment, isn't there? But I think you've touched on them there, is that you get the stuff that you can do, the deferral, the VAT, which is happening anyway, the PAYE, get your furloughing done, and then council tax grants if you're in that industry, and not a lot of the participants in this webinar will be, but certainly out there in the wider world, and then start thinking about the bigger job of the CBIL loans and things and getting that in. But then again, 130,000 applications, you've got to think about getting those in as fast as you can as well.
Exactly.
And I think what will probably happen, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Jackie, I know that we didn't really discuss this, but I think that probably what we're seeing is a £330 billion package of economic stimulus, but we may well see more. For example, New Zealand, I keep on pulling New Zealand examples, so I apologise for that, but New Zealand has just introduced a scheme where a company, if they made profit last year and paid tax on that profit, if they make a loss in this current year, can then claim back against the tax that they've paid. And so we may well see some sorts of new schemes, different schemes come in from the government, depending on the economic cycle and what the metrics are saying in terms of GDP and everything else. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should say that, because at the moment, under our current tax legislation for companies, if you make a loss this year, which a lot of my clients are obviously anticipating they are going to do, and they were doing well last year, we can carry back our tax losses by a year and get a tax rebate. Now, quite a few years ago, you could carry back your loss 3 years, and then they shortened it to 1 year. So as a result of what we're going through now, I would like to see that 3-year rule come back so that you can carry back your losses, because my clients are projecting losses this year. Whether they're going to be able to turn the business around and make a healthy profit next year is arguable. So yes, I would like to see my 3-year carryback brought back.
And that may well happen. I think that's probably a no-brainer, easy decision to make for them, isn't it? So I guess we'll wait and see. Now, do you have any advice?
Something else, David, we didn't talk about, and it may not be relevant to anybody on the phone call at the moment, but I'm also making sure I talk to everyone about research and development, because that is one avenue where the government has a lot of money to spend, billions of pounds, and a lot of SME business owners are not taking advantage of that. So I've got, like my events company, you know, they will get £100,000 R&D tax reclaim in their bank account as soon as we submit their year-end accounts, and that is going to be absolutely invaluable to them. So yeah, don't forget some of the other opportunities out there that have always been there but aren't taken advantage of.
That is actually great advice. Great advice, Jackie. I think you know, there's also other things that you can get from local government, isn't there, over and above the things that we've just discussed, which are there sitting there anyway,
Exactly.
because they want to encourage economic activity. So definitely, I think, do your research and think about that as well. R&D grants particularly good. Obviously, great for us as tech companies because we do a lot of R&D. You know, we're already buildings. So, we love it. But for estate practitioners, estate planning practitioners, I'm sure that there's probably an aspect of that they could consider as well. Now, do you have any advice on how to manage communicating this all to staff? What have you seen work well with your clients in the past and in this current time that we're in?
Well, we had just before this happened actually brought in Teams 365. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. So we've then now pushed that throughout the whole firm so that we can have whole firm meetings. I mean, there's 30 of us. It just about worked. You just have to put your hand up when you want to talk. But I've noticed that most of my clients have just set up Zoom. So I'm having all my year-end meetings with clients on Zoom, but they're also using that to have team events. So I've been invited to a Zoom quiz. Some of my clients are doing Pilates and yoga over Zoom. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, in these challenging times, your key asset is your staff. So we have to keep those communication lines open, especially with the ones that are furloughed as well. And you've just got to make sure you keep your communication clear and open. And I mean, we certainly got advice from somebody who's a nutritionist, and we sent an email around just talking about well-being, looking after yourself, you know, taking walks, you know, taking vitamins, encouraging exercise, and trying to have a work pattern at home, because you know, there's been a lot of advice out there on, you know, most of us aren't used to working from home, so you've got to have a different structure when you're working from home. So this has been a big learning for us and a lot of our clients.
Yeah, and look, I think you picked up on a point earlier on too, which I think is also relevant to this section, and that is you've got to be honest and transparent with your staff. And for many organisations, obviously you have different cultures, and you may not perhaps disclose where things are at. For Arken.legal, we have a very open culture, and I share everything that I'm able without alarming any staff or concerning them because they don't have the understanding of the business, or of course contravening any strategic or confidentiality agreements. But look, as much as I possibly can, I will tell them, hey, look, this is our situation. This is how we're expecting. These are our key risks. This is where we think we're probably going to end up in terms of revenue. These are the things that we can do on cost. Has anybody got any idea around costs that we can save? And I found that that's worked really well. But that works well for our business because that's our culture and that's the way that we operate. But not all businesses will work that way. So you just got to find your sweet spot, I think, in terms of what works for you as a leader, what works for your business culture. Would you agree, Jackie? Would you say that that's probably accurate for the clients that you've seen?
You know what? I think you're spot on, David, because I think if you don't empower your staff, how can you empower your team if they don't really know what your end goal is and what you're trying to achieve? And I know in our business, historically, it was very, very private. Everything was very, very private. You know, the managing partner would never share with me what we turned over, let alone what profit we made. We're now very open like you and very transparent. And I see my clients that have a much more successful bonded team atmosphere at work because they're very open and very very open with their numbers, and they share, you know, this is the number we've got to hit to break even this month. I mean, even just a simple tool like that, you'd be amazed at how many people don't share that with their team, and they have no idea what turnover needs to be generated just for the business to stand still. And I think that's very sad. So I would encourage openness because I think that empowers your team.
Yeah, and I think slightly off piste here, but it's really worth exploring. To me, that goes to purpose. And so if there's a shared purpose and everyone understands exactly where we're at, that then gives you a real power, that collective kind of community coming together where you can all aim towards the same sort of set of numbers or objectives. And we've found that works really well, and I found that has worked really well in other businesses as well. Now, it's difficult, isn't it, Jackie? It's a balance that you've got to try and achieve. Companies need to consider managing effectively during this phase, but there's also opportunities because in all of these different stages that we've seen over the years, there's some winners and there's some losers, and there's some organisations who seem to be doing really well. And I'm kind of thinking about, you know, getting back to a stage where we've got a new normal. What's your advice to clients on how to manage the balance successfully, and how do they get themselves ready to look for opportunities?
Well, I think with all of us as SME business owners, the one thing we always moan about is that we don't have time. So now we should have some time to just sit back and just think about what do we really want our business to look like? What's our business strategy? Take this opportunity to actually look at your customer base. I think we spend so long and the days go by so quickly that you're looking after the client base that you've had and you've built up over many years like we have, that sometimes you just don't sit back and actually look at, so where's the profitable clients, where's the loss-making clients, what do our products look like, do they need to be revamped, have we got the right services? With what's happening now, is there a new service offering that we can now give clients, or are there new products out there? And, you know, interesting to read some of the articles about how other businesses have adapted, you know, like Dyson and Mercedes and the catering company that's the restaurant chain Leon that's changed the way they work, and even the supermarkets. But people are starting to adapt and think of new ways of delivering their service to their clients. And the one thing that I also want to do in my business while we've got this break is just think about our workflows and our processes, and are we working as effectively and efficiently as we could be? Probably not, because we don't like change as humans, do we? So we carry on doing the same thing, and I want to sit there and question, rather than going, well, we used to do that 10 years ago or 5 years ago, why do we need to do it like that? So I think it's an opportunity for us all just to change our mindset and just look at things differently.
Yeah, I agree actually. And look, an estate planning example of that would be, and this is something that's not COVID related, but I guess it is appropriate. We're constantly talking to clients who've run a very similar business process in terms of drafting of documents, and the more volume, the more critical and efficient business processes. And so the biggest consideration that we come across for organisations with volume or without volume is that 50% of a drafter's time can be spent rekeying information. So essentially you're sitting there and typing in off notes and creating a will that way. And we're often having conversations with clients about, well, hey, look, there's a different way to do that. And so what that means is that if they can get rid of that 50%, that they've then got choices, because they can either scale up off that and take on more volume, which means more revenue, or they could take the choice, particularly perhaps relevant in these times, that they don't need as many drafters in their team because they've got more efficiency and they can run that at a lower cost base and therefore find more profitability, and maybe invest that cost efficiency back into the front end of things, which is perhaps finding more sales and looking at other volume opportunities. And so in our industry, the estate planning practitioner industry, I think that there's probably something in and around that too, to sit back and to look at the efficiencies that you can gain in some of your business processes. Now, if we're thinking about phases, all things come to an end eventually, don't they? And so too will this lockdown phase. What is the next phase after lockdown from a financial management perspective?
I think for all of us, we will sit and reflect on our learnings from this experience, whatever those learnings are. But I think one of the big learnings will be that we all have to be agile, because business changes, and this is quite a major change. But we need to make sure that we are operating everything as efficiently as possible and using our systems to their full potential. And to be honest, if your financial reporting structure isn't robust enough, how can we make informed decisions about our business? When we're making these decisions now, you need to have robust financial accounting, otherwise you won't make the right decision. So if you aren't doing your forecasting and you don't know your cash flow, you can't make those decisions. So if anyone hasn't had a learning out of this, that is one big takeaway, that we need to make sure all of our clients have a handle on their numbers and can make these decisions, and also be agile and be adaptable to this change, which is not going to stop.
No, well, it's not, is it? I think my personal view is that we're probably going to see more change intensify as a matter of course, because we have to, but also because the opportunity is there and everybody else is now starting to do it, and so we'll need to get on board to be as efficient. And no doubt when you get into these periods where things are a bit more challenging, there's some more pressure on price as well. So we can expect to see perhaps that happen as we go forward. And so all the more reason, if those are the dynamics of the industry that we're going into, to then consider being as lean and as mean and as cost efficient and time efficient as you possibly can be.
Yeah.
Now, if we think about some of the potential opportunities that can present themselves, and I've talked before about winners and losers, and I think they are going to happen. And if you think about it from a financial perspective, what would companies need to do to be in a position to access and realise any opportunities that might become available in the market?
Well, I mean, to be honest, some of my clients are already looking at some of these opportunities. So, businesses are going to need access to cash, and that could be from the bank or your shareholders or even an angel investor. But there are going to be some businesses out there that are going to need help. And one of my clients is even looking at a business now where they could complement them, and they could bring that business in, which will not only save that other business, but actually enhance my client's business. So again, it goes back to that good financial management and good forecasting and knowing your numbers and understanding your numbers, so that you can put these cases forward to your shareholders or your bank or the angel investor, because there are going to be some opportunities out there, and maybe we'll see businesses merging together as well to come out of this. So I think if you need to be creative and agile, and look at, do some research in your sector, about what other businesses are doing. And unfortunately, there are going to be some businesses that won't survive, but maybe other businesses and our clients will benefit from that, and be able to take on some of their staff and grow more successfully as a result of it.
Look, I think that's a really significant point, actually, Jackie, because it may not be that you go out there and acquire businesses, although in the industry that we work in, I guess there's probably an opportunity to purchase some bull banks if you wanted to head down that track. And I know that there's certain people who are out there thinking about doing that, but perhaps the best opportunity is to consider the fact that a lot of these volume plays that the practitioners who are servicing those markets at the moment either might fall away, or the organizations themselves start looking for cost and time efficiencies. And so they may be looking out for new partners, new and different ways of doing things. Perhaps they want to engage with somebody who's more agile, who has more a tool set, who is able to offer them perhaps new revenue making opportunities, because those organizations, think about a charity, for example, might be under pressure themselves. And so if you're able to come to them with an opportunity to solve some of their problems, then that, I think, is probably a consideration when we stop to think about, hey, right, what can we do to access some of the opportunities? It doesn't have to be about acquisition.
No, and that's a very good point about joint ventures, because one of my most successful clients has made themselves even more successful because they've had a joint venture relationship for the last 5 years, which has enabled them to do something they wouldn't have been able to do on their own because they would have been viewed as too small. So having that, and I went back to about collaboration, I think earlier, having that collaboration, is a win-win, and then you both survive and grow.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, look, in your experience of advising companies who've perhaps gone through tough times as a result of a business downturn, what's your advice on a general basis about the mindset of decision makers, business owners, shareholders, on how to manage towards successful outcomes out of the back of one of these periods?
Well, David, as you said, I have been, before COVID-19, I've been through a recession before, and one of my very big clients, unfortunately, the plug got pulled by their bank, because in construction we all know that banks are very nervous. But one of the things there was that the business owners still remained calm and optimistic, and they sat back and they knew they had a good product. They knew they had they had a big history behind them. They've been in business a long time, but they took a company that went into liquidation, turning over 25 million, and turned it into 3 successful businesses that turn over less than 5 each, and they're more successful now than they were before. So I think if you remain optimistic, you calm, they kept good relationships with all their clients and their suppliers, and as long as you're collaborative, and it just shows how you treat people, they ended up building a successful business again. And I think we said earlier that people will remember the people that helped them in these times, and they'll remember some of the businesses that weren't so supportive of us in this difficult time, like some of the airlines and the travel companies. And so don't be scared to scale down, because turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and we don't want to be chasing the turnover. So I think my message is be collaborative with your team, your customers and suppliers, because you don't know what's around the corner. And the other big piece for me is just hold on to your visions and values, because if that's what drives your business and your culture, and gives you that, as you said, gel with your team, and your customers will feel that vision and value. So that's very important.
Absolutely. And look, just a quick anecdote from me, I always find that if I've got these massive, huge challenges, and I've done a lot of work recently where I come in and rescue businesses or transform businesses, and generally you get in and there's just sort of problems every time you turn over a rock in the business. And when you're confronted with that, you just need to take a step back and get your plan together and then solve problems one by one, rather than perhaps focusing on the overall problem. So, what are your priorities and what are you going to do? And you keep the plate spinning. But you've just got to be really positive about the fact that you've got some short-term goals and you're going to hit those. And then you're on to the next one, and then you're on to the next one. And depending on the way you work as a leader and as a business owner, you may be very good at managing multiple plates that are spinning, or you may prefer to perhaps manage one or two at a time. But the key takeaway from that I hope you'd take on board is get a plan, be aware of the big picture, but start with a plan on the priority issues and get some short-term goals and knock them off one by one by one. And over a period of time, you're actually going to get there. And I've done that numerous times in businesses, and it's worked really well for me. So Jackie, you mentioned vision and values, and this, my staff will tell you, is something that I'm really big on. I just absolutely believe in vision and values and purpose. So companies that come under pressure, they can sometimes kind of question those, can't they? And you wonder whether actually they're just a plaque on the wall and whether they're actually meaningful at all. What would you say to that in your experience?
Well, I think I've come across many companies, as I'm sure we all have, where their values don't resonate with their business. And to be honest, I mean, there's one example I've got where the company did actually end up going under, and yet I really truly believe that they really did hold those values, but in reality they didn't. So not holding on to your values can be your downfall. So I think now is probably a very good time to just maybe reset everyone's thinking and just rethink, what is your vision, what are your values, are they aligned, and have you communicated them with your team? Because you've all got to share the same values. I'm a very strong believer in that. It's the foundation of your business.
Absolutely, and that doesn't preclude making hard commercial decisions. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not that if you're forced to and you're in a situation where you have to make a decision that is tough and you have to let some people go, that doesn't say that you're going to sacrifice your vision and values.
Exactly. So, yeah, because if one of your values is being open and honest, you'll be, as long as you communicate it properly and fairly, you're just holding to your value, aren't you, of being open and honest?
Absolutely. So just moving on to those people who have been furloughed or perhaps have stopped being able to carry out day-to-day activities such as seeing clients. What's your advice on some activities that they could carry out now to get ready for the next phase?
Well, I think going back to what we said earlier about just rethinking about your vision and values and your business plan and your strategy, I think now's the time to sit down and think about that, but document it. Document this plan, be it your marketing plan, what money you need to get through the next stages, but analyze everything. I mean, even take time to just read and train up on some new software, get some new skills that will complement your current business. But my key message is just get that plan written down and work out what changes you need to make and what you're trying to aim for in the next phase.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got time, use it well, and getting a plan together, I think, is critical, isn't it? Yeah. Fully agree with that one. Now, Jackie, is there anything else in the summary before we get to the questions that may have been asked that you'd like to add that we haven't covered already here today?
I think probably it's just reinforcing in a bit more depth that at the end of the day, I think my key takeaway and learning, and hopefully everyone will agree with me, that all businesses need to embrace technology and digitalization. We can't, none of us can run our businesses without it. It doesn't matter in what industry we're in. We need to get our applications in the cloud, and we need to look at our IT security. Look, we're all working from home. And there's a lot of hackers out there doing some naughty things, as I read in the press today. So, and we also need to introduce ways of how we visually interact with our staff using Teams 365 or Zoom. We need to get our accounting in the cloud. And we need to make sure all our applications are aligned. I mean, I myself personally, I know we've built our business on different software packages which now aren't totally compatible, and we've fallen foul of that. So even we need to look at the way our IT applications work. So you end up bolting on something, it fixes a short-term problem, but in the long term that wasn't the right strategy. Maybe that was down to cost. So I think my big takeaway here is we all have to accept that technology is here and we need to embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, as a final summary before we take any questions that have been asked, what would you say that the golden rules are on successful financial management during this time and the time that we're going into?
Keep remembering that cash is king, be in control, have a clear vision and a strategy, and make sure you document your plan, communicate it with your team, keep in touch with all your clients, and also keep your name out there. I know it's very easy to slash your marketing budget at a time like this, but I'm still carrying on with my marketing and my telemarketing. You know, we want our name to be remembered after all of this, and everyone wants their name to be remembered. So now is not a good time to stop your marketing. So they would be my key messages.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, look, Jackie, that has been absolutely superb, and I'm sure that the participants got a lot out of this. Now, Jess, I'm just going to ask you as to whether there's any questions that have been asked by the participants that we might want to answer.
No, not at the moment, Dave. It seems like you and Jackie have covered everything.
Okay, brilliant. Well, look, let's just go to the next slide, and I'll just talk in the last couple of minutes that we've got to the thing that I always talk about in webinars. I don't want to disappoint you, for anybody who's been in a webinar with me before. I always find the room for a Winston Churchill quote, and I couldn't believe that this was a quote that Winston Churchill actually made. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Now, you would think that considering what he went through to lead the country through World War II, that he would know a thing or two about crisis. And the thing I love about this quote is that he's actually being positive about it. And he's saying, well, actually, it's happening. A bit like we were saying at the start of the webinar, there's not a lot we can do about it. We're in it, and we've got to manage our way through it as much as we can. So let's be positive about it. Let's not be overwhelmed by it. Let's not be negative or consumed by the bad news. Let's make sure that we can make a positive outcome as much as we possibly can from this experience. And Jess, if you can just go to the next slide. I think this one's also appropriate. Mind you, I think all Winston Churchill quotes are appropriate. Well, this just kind of segues very nicely, because we are all worms, but I believe that I am a glowworm. So I believe what I take away from that is that he's talking about being a very positive individual, and that is his differential when he compares himself to his fellow man. So I just thought that those two quotes were appropriate to consider and reflect on as we wind up in this webinar. Now, look, just to close out, I want to wish you all the very best, and thank you for your attendance in this webinar today. We're going to be running some more webinars over the next little period, as many as we possibly can, to try and help you out. So if you have any feedback for us on this webinar or webinars that you'd like us to run, please let us know. We do take a lot of feedback on. Our support lines are going crazy, so please do engage with us and let us know if you've got anything that we can assist you with. We've got all sorts of things from a product suite perspective, which we're trying to bring to help the industry, and they will be of use as we go forward, not just for the next couple of months. So we'll keep you in touch with all of those things as well. But here's Jackie's details in case you wanted to contact her. So that's on the next slide. So it's Jackie Wilding, and there are details there, and I'll just pause there for a moment to give you a chance to take a note of that. Or alternatively, you can take a photo with your phone, of course, but feel free to drop us a line, and we'd be more than happy to put you in touch. And my details are also on the next slide. Again, I welcome your input, any feedback to the webinar in particular, or any other ideas on the webinars, or anything you'd just like to reach out to me and discuss, I do welcome your contact. So thank you again for your attendance, and I do wish you all the very best of business, the very best of health. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.